Your friends are scrolling through short content, but you, my friend, you're here to learn. Welcome to the RAAAZ Clips. What was happening with the lowest strata of society up till now? I genuinely want to know, is it, and I'll tell you where this is coming from, because we spoke last, I think in Feb or January, and I've had this whole political phase of podcasts like since then. Post the political phase, I've had political commentators. I had Tehseen Poonawala on the show who said something which I wanted to confirm on this episode. He said that because of the size of our population, we would have anyways seen this kind of growth, and it's nothing special that the current government did different. Is that true?
Well, one very important thing to remember, growth is not inevitable.
Okay, this is what I
right? Growth is earned. And so if we were just sitting around twiddling our thumbs, it's not obvious that the economy would be growing. After all, we are now the world's largest population, but we were the world's second largest population from 1947 onwards, in fact, even before that. So why were we poor? So just having a large population means nothing. What matters is what do you do with it? Now, we unfortunately wasted 4.5 decades till 1991 attempting to do a socialist planned economy, which didn't work. Our economy blew up. Then starting 1991, we began to reform the economy, and it generated growth. There's no doubt that our quality of life today is much higher than it was in the early 90s. That doesn't mean that there aren't lots of poor people. There are still hundreds of millions of very poor people. But no matter how you measure it, it is true that the number of poor people is falling very exponentially. And that the average Indian now is better fed, he has better quality of life than has been for a very long time.
And it's going to keep going upward.
Well, this is what has to be earned. The point I keep making to you is that there's nothing natural about this growth. Everything has to be earned. So we began to earn growth from the 90s onwards by finally beginning to liberalize our economy, allowing our private sector energies to show through. Now, that energy, so to speak, will keep petering out unless you do another round of reform. So that energy from the 90s and early 2000s fed through till a certain point in time and then petered out. So by about 2012, 2013, 14, our economy was again slowing down. Our banks were going bust. We were part of the Fragile Five and so on. You will remember that. And so that momentum petered out. And you had to rebuild that momentum. And for that, you had to do the following things. You had to clean up the banks. I was myself involved heavily in, it took me a lot of energy when I first joined the government to clean up the banks. Then we had to create an insolvency and bankruptcy code so that companies that went bankrupt along the way could be cleaned out of the system and their assets could be sold, and we could again take risks. Because remember, if you're based on a private sector entrepreneurship-based system, some part of the risks, business risks that the system takes will go wrong. That's what risk-taking is, right? The whole point is some of it will not work out. But you have to have a system that continuously cleans out these bad bets, so to speak. And so the insolvency and bankruptcy code was needed. Similarly, we didn't have a common market. So India may be a large country, but every state had its own tax rules. I don't know if you're old enough to remember this. Even cities used to have their own tax rules called octroi. But till as recently as 2017, every state used to have its indirect tax system. So eventually when we created GST, we basically signed a free trade agreement with ourselves. And so finally we became a common market. Similarly, we did other things. We used to be a very high inflation country. Okay, not in the Argentinian sense of inflation, but certainly a country where inflation used to be in the 8 to 12% range most of the time. So we introduced something called an inflation targeting framework. You will now know every 2 months the Monetary Policy Committee comes together and they target interest rates they use interest rates to target inflation. And the target is between 2% and 6% inflation. So it's not 0% inflation, it's 2 to 6%, which is considered reasonable for our level of development. And since then, more or less, inflation has remained in that band. It's on a couple of occasions gone above and a couple of occasions come below, but it has served us very well, because despite the COVID episode, despite all the inflationary episodes worldwide, despite countries around us like Sri Lanka, Pakistan, etc., imploding, and many countries around the world, not just these countries, but whether it's Egypt or Turkey, and even huge inflationary spirals in the US, we did not have this. In our case, what happens is vegetable prices like tomato will spike up for a few months and then come crashing down again. That kind of inflation is fine because it's not spiraling out of control in one direction, right? So given that, I think we have done a good job, basically maintaining control, macroeconomic stability, creating these frameworks for a common market and so on. And then we have kept opening up new sectors. So even in the middle of COVID, we opened up the drone sector. We opened up the geospatial and cartography sector. We opened up the space sector. So we have kept doing reforms. We privatized Air India, all in the middle of COVID.
What do you mean opened up a sector?
So earlier, we used to have a license permit system. So a sector was kept closed and only the public sector could operate in it. Later on, became a little more liberal. We allowed private sector into it, but then all kinds of rules, regulations used to be there. So over a period of time, we liberalized it, opened it up, till we opened it up completely. Now, basically, anybody wants to set up a company and some of these things, you can do whatever you want. Okay. So this is how we have opened up the economy, because then startups can come, private sector can take risks, foreign companies can come and set up things. So this is something we have to continuously do.
Okay. So the way I look at it, I look at a country as kind of a greenhouse, and then depending on the rules of economics that are in place in that country, the greenhouse is going to develop in a particular way. And all you can do as economists, as the government, is tweak the rules and then see organically what happens in the country.
Yes, in a sense.
Okay.
Remember, since you said a greenhouse, basically what you're saying, there are all these energies coming in, yes, and it's heating it up. But you have to see, somebody has to manage it so it doesn't overheat. Right? It can overheat. You have to manage the plants inside the greenhouse. You don't want Arctic plants in a greenhouse which will die in the heat. You have to water it, and so on and so forth. So a greenhouse has to be managed. There's nothing natural about a flourishing greenhouse.
Right. I think the art here is the rule setting.
Rule setting is one part of it. And that, by the way, an ancient Indian governance rule that is called Dandaniti. And there were schools of thought, for example, the schools of Shukracharya, who said that is all that is needed. You just need to create the rules and enforce the contracts, and the economy flourishes. But there were people who disagreed. There was the school of Brihaspati, who said, no, you need active economic policy. You have to pay attention to what is happening.
As in the first one said, you set rules and then let it flourish. The second one says...
But you have to enforce it.
Got it.
You set the rules, enforce the rules or contracts, and it flourishes.
And the second one says, no, you have to keep tweaking it.
You have to keep tweaking and do policies. Actually intervene. You have to put in infrastructure. You have to do other things as well. So that is the school of Brihaspati. Brihaspati is not saying that Shukra is wrong. Rules are needed. He's just saying Shukra is incomplete. You need to have active policy. Then there are others. Kautilya, for example, Chanakya. He writes in the Arthashastra that yes, you need the rules, you need the economic policies, but they have to be done in a certain cultural context, and you also need a philosophical anchor to it. So, the same set of rules in a certain context may work, in another context it may not work. So Chanakya puts the Treyi. Treyi means the first three Vedas, but more broadly means the cultural context.
So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you check out this playlist for more videos just like this. It's DRS Clips.